Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episodes, and we will discuss on the Urban AI Lab. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob and Mr. Allens. Mr. Rob, how you want to define this Urban AI Lab?
Well, in theory, the way you'd set up an urban AI lab is you'd base it pretty heavily on simulation. You'd first create an AI-driven simulation of the environment you're going to be operating the AIs in, and then you prioritize the things that you feel that you need to do, and then you'd create prototypes of those things, and then run them against the simulation and see what the benefits were, and if the benefits were sufficient to more than cover the cost then you would rank them as with regard to their need and their monetary return, and then implement according to that schedule. And so the urban lab would be largely based on simulation, and its purpose would be to determine the most cost-effective technologies to address the most important problems the city had.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. How you want to define this Urban AI Lab?
I think Rob has put together very good basic understanding of what an AI lab is. I guess urban lab, and that is the creation of the simulation. I wanted to kind of go a step farther because I think one of the things we can do with AI is to simulate how AI will influence things, which sounds sort of abstracting things a layer, but. For example, we already have automated systems that run our traffic lights and our sewage system and our freshwater systems and our electrical grid. A lot of that could be automated. A lot of it already is automated, but could be further extended its automation through artificial intelligence. And I think having that level of management is something that we need to look toward. And to do that, we need to have a way to test bed that stuff in a sandbox before we just start letting any old AI program run our cities. So yes, I think the testing and simulation piece is incredibly important and needs to be a step first.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith. How you want to define today's topic, this Urban AI Lab?
Well, the definitions, I believe, have been fairly good as you begin to look at them. I think, though, as you begin to look at some of what the core research themes should be, I agree with doing the simulations, the digital twins, and others, and understanding how it works. But you also need to look at how do you use, I want to use the term urban AI, to really look at how do you look at the ethical parts of it in promoting fairness and looking at data privacy, algorithm biases, and things. I also think you need to look at how to use generative AI in this instance to design innovative solutions, particularly for urban growth, for urban migration, for infrastructure, and the responses that you see that happens in these environments. We've here where I live, we've had some really interesting weather events, and we had at my house 80-mile-an-hour winds and hail the size of tennis balls, and the neighborhood looks like a war zone with 40, 50-inch diameter trees just uprooted and things. So using this type of an urban AI lab to not just look at the common problems, but also begin to look at the things which are out of the ordinary. And then how do you do responses? In the military, there's something called ground truth. And it's a very important consideration. I fortunately was involved in the intelligence community side as it transitioned from film to digital. And that dramatically changed at that time what is known as ground truth, and actually changed how you begin to do tasking and other things like that, because the digital domain brings things that you cannot do in the old analog world. And we're going to see the same thing in cities. Part of what we did in the past in cities, that I'm going to say analog, will be very different in a digital city. And to me, as I look at your term of an urban AI lab, to me, it's just the next generation of the digitalization of a city, of a region, of communities. And the other thing you're going to see with an urban AI lab is that, just like I don't like the term smart cities, I like this term smart regions, I like this term smart communities. You're going to see a urban AI lab focused more around communities than you will see cities and regions. And one of the reasons for this is that the cost to convert a region, an entire city, to a digital-based urban AI lab is tremendous. The infrastructure costs are tremendous. And will we get there? Yes. But that goes back to some of what Rob was saying earlier, is that one of the big things is we'll be able to use this for simulation. We'll be able to use it as a tool put in place as we're going forward. And I think that is really what's important, is that we understand that as we look at the world, the way we, again, I hate the term, the way we transform is one that is not a straight line. It's actually not a Fisher-Price curve. In that it has its own ups and downs. And that's going to be the same thing with an urban AI labs, much like we see. This week we heard about an AI tool that was going to be discontinued, rewrite its own code so it couldn't be shut down. Well, that's going to be bad if we go into an urban AI lab, and the AI tool disagrees with the directions the city council's taking, or that decisions that the first responders have made of shutting down areas because of what they perceive as a human threat, the AI doesn't agree with them. And so you will see that. And, and some of the things that as older guys kind of take into account, like if you go back and look at the laws of robotics, and the first law of robotics was you cannot harm a human. Well, we lost that a couple of years ago, in that we see now military robotics that are in positions where that's their task is to kill humans and to wipe out other robots and things as well too. But we understand that as we go to an urban AI environment, we have to put in place guardrails. We have to put in place things that prevent it from doing harm to individuals, doing harms to communities. And we simply don't have that today. So that's going to be one of the early challenges, Dr. Sharif, as we go forward, because you really have to, in an urban environment, have an AI tool understand that ground truth. And ground truth is what it really is without all the disinformation. Ground truth is what it is without the posturing of political parties, without the posturing of large commercial companies and groups. And that's going to be the things that you have to do, Dr. Sharif, to make an urban AI lab work. So sorry to go into that much, but it's one that I fortunately have seen implemented in other domains, and it comes with its challenges and it comes with its rewards. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, my next question for you. Uh, how does the Urban AI Lab ensure that its AI solutions are ethical and inclusive in urban setting? And if you set a standard for ethical AI, or is there any standard and procedure?
Well, probably the strongest ethical standard that's in the marketplace is the one that IBM set several years back in terms of describing what ethical AI is. And that one probably should inform a statement from whatever lab is attempting to provide similar kinds of capabilities. But ethics is a pretty fuzzy area, and it can change a lot, person to person and region to region. So it's advised to at least draft out what ethics mean in the context of AI in the lab. I once again use IBM as a starting point, but not the endpoint, and then determine what rules are going to be applied to the AIs that you create, and then put in place a set of tests so that you can take any AI that you're evaluating against a particular set of metrics and see how they perform. And that way you can pick the model that you like, the solution that seems to work the best, both ethically and physically in simulation, and have a successful conclusion. But yeah, ethics should be sadly, ethics isn't at the forefront of AI development. It should be, and so here the city, the municipality needs to really inform on what it means for them to be ethical, and then set up a rigorous methodology to test the AIs against those and I was going to say guidelines, but there really should be pretty solid rules. Mm-hmm. Things that you don't vary. Recognize that AIs also would need to be tested over time. Right now, they're losing between 2 and 5% accuracy per year, which is problematic. And so making sure that you're retesting even after implementation to see that they continue to comply with these ethical rules is also very important, because they might be designed and put in place properly, but as they degrade and are corrupted by bias, they may need to be corrected over time.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, how does this Urban AI Lab ensure that AI solutions are ethical and inclusive in urban settings? Do you want to set a standard for ethical AI or something like that? Yeah.
I think a standard, something like the WWW conference or consortium that manages IP addresses and how things on the internet integrate with each other would be absolutely fantastic as a guiding, if not governing body for AI development. But I'd like to make 2 quick points that sort of underscore this. And one is concerning just urban planning in general. It's gone on for a long time. That analog period goes back thousands of years. And so I think it's important to recognize that other technologies have shaped the urban environment, whether that's transportation or materials, et cetera. And those are areas, particularly in architecture, that are not addressed. When an architect goes to build a building, there's no global database on things about the best way to do that in a certain location or under certain conditions. And typically they strive to build the best building they can that will stand on a spot. And the best ones and frankly the good ones take into account the surrounding buildings, the surrounding area, like with the law of robotics, do no harm. Maybe that's the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm first, right? I mean, and a lot of times AI simulation and development would be great for determining how a building will affect the environment. In Dallas, Texas, they built a big mirrored wall of a building. You've seen mirror wall buildings before. This one was right across from a sculpture gallery. And the certain period of the day, I think it was about noon to 3 in the afternoon, the sun was concentrated strongly enough into that sculpture garden of the art museum across the way that it was actually heating up metal statues, bronze statues, especially lower heat tolerance, and deforming them. So, I mean, that's a pretty powerful effect for a single building, and that could have been thought through. And I want to give an example that speaks both to how we design cities and how we make them accessible. And it was reported by a British marketing person who had sciatica, and he was talking with a gentleman from England and who's London's expert in it's a governmental position to advocate for walking zones. So that's what he does. He studies cities and finds out where they could put in more walking zones, more green space, more kind of ways to get people out to walk. And this marketer with his sciatica said, well, have you built in any seats? And the guy was perplexed. He's like, why do we need seats to encourage people to walk? And he said, look, healthy people, they need more walking space. But frankly, he used England as an example, but the planet's got plenty of flat surface to walk on. What we really need are ways of making it more accessible. And benches do that for the people who need to get out and walk the most, who might be out of shape or have some kind of ailment that prevents them from walking long distances. They will walk short ones, and they will walk especially in areas where they know there's a chance to sit down and rest. So it's just a case where the urban planner had not considered, the tails of the human population there that would need seats when they're out walking. And I don't know that AI is going to get us to consider that. I mean, I don't think AI will bring the tool that prompts humans to do that, but the humans that do that will be able to, that do consider these, factors and integration and inclusion and democratization of the process, will be able to use AI to do that much more effectively. So, by aggregating numbers and looking at populations and things like that.
Thank you. Mr. David, can you share some concrete example of the project and application we can develop through Urban AI Lab or the Innovation Lab?
Sure, I can do that. But before I make that comment, I would like to actually make a comment about what Alan said about what happened in Dallas, Texas. The museum that was impacted across the street, the lady who runs that and her family are good personal friends.
Good.
And it was so interesting there because when you look at what Andrea was doing in this space, she actually went out, and one of her solutions to that is she got people to come in and plant fully grown trees.
Wow. Yeah.
All around the museum ground, which not only helped mitigate some of the activity there, but it actually made it more welcoming. It did all the other things there too. So what I would hope that an urban AI lab could do is begin to look at more of the out of the box, more of the innovative type of approaches that can solve problems like that. Because in my first remarks, I talked about the innovation that could happen. And I think as we look at our urban environment, and this really gets into some of the examples we're going to talk about in a second with this Dr. Shree, the more we can look at things that are not the way we've done it the last 250 years, I think we'll see more opportunity to really make some of the step function changes that we're looking at, because you see things that's kind of interesting. As I look at what's happening in Singapore, for example, Alan talked about the traffic light control system. Well, what they did there is in Singapore, the Land Transit Authority and the Institute for their research used it to not just optimize the traffic lights, but to really look at how do I make changes to the overall circulation in Singapore, not just from a pure transportation standpoint, but how do I do it with taking into account the changing in the buildings, the changing in hours and things like that. So what they did, part of it is they used neural networks to analyze each of the individual intersections, not just overall flow, but the intersections, And it wasn't just car counts and things. It was how are the behaviors happening? And some of the outputs of this is it significantly reduced wait time, it improved flows. You're seeing something right now happening in London with the Turing Institute doing some of the same type of things, looking beyond just how do I time stoplights and traffic lights, but how do I make a difference there? One of the things that was interesting, I've been an innovation judge at South by Southwest now for 16 years. And one of the things we saw this last year was an application for an award from the city of Montreal, Canada. And they had an infrastructure risk prediction application that they've developed there. And it was interesting that they were using machine learning to predict pipeline breaks and pipeline bursts. Because the environment in Montreal has some very extreme climate activity changes from coal to others, and it's in an environment where the infrastructure isn't there. So what the machine learning on the pipeline breaks is doing is trying to help them prioritize maintenance, trying to help them look at the other failure points. You see in Amsterdam, there's something called Social Glass, which is trying to use AI to analyze behavior data from social media for sediment analysis, for urban insights and planning. You see others where they are looking at ways to use urban AI in urban robots, including autonomous vehicles, delivery drones, cleaning robots. And this one's interesting because they're actually trying to look at how to do these things autonomously with these robots, to do environmental recognition. How do you do decision making in a robotics area in an urban environment? And how do you look at the machine human interaction? And how do you factor in the unpredictability of humans in an ad hoc environment versus autonomous driving where there's rules of the road? And you're seeing just so many like that. LA's tried a project, and this is a public-private partnership where they're trying to use AI to help manage and optimize curb space for parking and deliveries. And I can tell you here in Austin, that's a huge problem we focus on here. And it makes sense to me now to begin to go back and look at ways to do that. And there's so many other examples, Dr. Struth, there's places where we see AI being used to help drive air quality sensing and how to do it. We see it in water metering, particularly as you look at the life cycle of water meters and how that's changing and how do you optimize it. You see it in biodiversity monitoring. And there's one that's kind of really interesting to me is that New York, because of the real challenges you see in a city like New York or Tokyo or Sao Paulo or some of the others like that, they are working with several companies and with Microsoft.
Ooh, I think we just lost David.
And they are actively looking at how do I take this data and not just change policy and not just to change regulations, but how do I use this type of data to go and change how cars are designed, how we do with our light rail situation, how we do the other things. So it's taking, there's this old where you take the data from the source, while you take output from the source, a sensor or whatever, you turn into data becomes information, that information becomes knowledge, knowledge becomes wisdom. But even with the wisdom part, if you don't take action, it doesn't mean anything. AI tools usually stop before wisdom and definitely before action. And you have to go through that intelligence cycle there, going all the way to action to have meaningful things happening, Dr. Sharif. So I think those are some pretty good examples.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, my next question for you, how does the Urban AI Lab collaborate with the local government, business, and resident to implement the AI solutions? And if you give some example from Silicon Valley and how this USA ecosystem work for collaborating with all of the things.
Well, you say, how did they collaborate? The lab is set up as a vehicle for those different organizations, at least the ones that are active, to provide suggestions, make requests. The AI lab, the AI Urban Lab, it would be another function of government, and therefore would be interrelated with the other functions. Now, recognize that governmental functions often don't talk to each other, and labs in particular have a habit of getting off on their own and de-integrating themselves from the government process, and so that's got to be avoided. Otherwise, the lab's going to put forward suggestions that won't be able to be implemented. So making sure that there are in the governance board for the lab, there are people from each of the organizations that are co-funding and are going to benefit from the lab, so they have input into what the lab is doing, and the lab has a way to communicate out to those people because they're really the customers what it is that they're attempting and getting feedback on a regular basis on what's needed and whether or not what the lab is considering. And remember, we're running all of this in simulation. Is actually workable for the considered group. So it's designed from the ground up. Have advisory boards, operational boards that are made up of people that are from the groups that they're serving, and that provides that loop because the labs are kind of are working on the cutting edge. I think provides that closed loop of informing the lab what the needs are and whether what the lab's doing are truly addressing those needs or something else. Often when you're dealing with technology, you have a pretty big information gap between the people that want the solution and the people that are trying to craft the solution. That's not uncommon. It's every IT organization on the planet has to deal with this. And so part of the effort has to be to train up the city partners, at least in the basics of artificial intelligence, what it can, what it can't do, and what some of the inherent costs are to doing some of the things that might be considered. So, for instance, if you wanted to try to instrument every single citizen in the city, which you would, in theory, want to do, if you're going to create a valid simulation of say, utilities, the cost of that is going to be excessive. And so what you probably end up doing is more of a sampling methodology where you'd instrument a subset of these, a sample of the overall population, if you will, and use that sample to represent the population. But you'd have to assure the sample matched the ethnic and sexual diversity of the population. Otherwise, the sample will not be accurate when it comes to predicting the outcome when you actually roll the technology out. So it's a process of really integrating the lab into the city governance infrastructure, and then making sure any sampling methodology that's used to inform the simulation is representative of the population that you're sampling.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, what's your advice? How we can collaborate with this ecosystem like government, business, and implement these solutions?
Well, first I'd like to address just the data gathering piece. And I think that with sufficient, any city can develop sufficient computing power to crunch the numbers that they're already taking in. And I think a big part of that, for example, they're monitoring the city monitors electric use, and they bill people for it, right? So they have every house's electric consumption. And I think that's something, if there's a way to just export that data into a data set that shows, that's geotagged and shows how much electricity people are using at any given house. I mean, that can be anonymized and that can be aggregated and anonymized so that it gives us a pretty accurate, like, we have a month-to-month number on how much electricity gets used in the city. So I think a lot of things like that. What's tougher is, what's the little fly, the Daphnia, the little water fly or whatever. How many Daphnia live in the park, right? That's the kind of thing that's tough to measure. You actually got to get out there and do samples to find out how many little bugs are in the stream to see. And you can't sample the whole stream. But I think a lot of things in an urban environment, how many cars are registered there versus any measure of how to capture cars on the road at a given time, which we have those too. So those systems can be computed through. And I think in the past, I think of the Allende government and their cybertronics or whatever they wanted to call it, tried to do this back in the 60s. There's the military joke about building a supercomputer to figure out how to win the Vietnam War. And I don't know, somewhere around 1969, they programmed in all the variables they thought were significant, and the computer spit it out that they won the war back in '58. So it's not obviously what it takes to actually measure environmental controls and people moving around and city population is tough, but I think it's an alignment of sensors. We're gathering that data, and it may or may not be in a usable form. And sure, we might have to sample until we can get it into a usable form, but that really needs to happen for any given city. I'm not suggesting a global form, but certainly maybe regional, or in the Texas case, North Texas Council of Governments, the INTEX COG or whatever it is, could certainly be looking at those type of sensor recalibrations, just so that we have valid information to base our simulation on. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith, how you want to share your thoughts about this collaboration process?
Sure. What's interesting to me is you look at things like the concept of a urban AI lab is that it has to collaborate really with the whole technopolis. We've heard a lot in the last few minutes about it working with the government side, but it also has to work with the businesses, both the large businesses and the medium and small businesses. It also needs to work with academia. Your question, it says government, businesses, and residents, but academia is a very important part of that, because that is how economic development works within cities and regions, is that you have to have academia involved to produce the workers, to produce the knowledge bases, and other things that are necessary to interact there. And then the residents, one of the things you've heard us talk about every time we've talked about advanced technologies, Dr. Sharif, is education's the cornerstone of it. And you've got to educate not just the residents, but you have to educate everyone around the whole community in what's going to be done. You cannot have government making decisions about something they don't know. You also need to have businesses understanding what the government's trying to do, what the residents require. What you have to really work closely with academia to understand not what are the requirements you had yesterday or you think you have today, but the requirements you're going to have down the road. When we built the MCC consortia and the Sematech consortia here in Austin, one of the key things we did is we went not just to the research universities at the high end, but we went to the community colleges and others like that to develop the entire ecosystem of the human capital that was needed to support a research consortium. And that was one of the reasons we were successful with those two consortia here, where many other consortia around the world have failed because they were just too focused on the narrow band and they didn't look broader at the requirements. And that's one of the reasons why I want to make the point that academia is a broad term, but it's so necessary. You might see something like an urban AI lab that the people who are in high school and even younger than that become key elements in the transformation of what an urban AI lab can be, because they're the ones who are going to explain it to their grandparents and others and are going to help get that critical mass going there. So I think that's one of the big things, Dr. Sharif, is you've got to go ahead and involve the entire Technopolis, and that you need to make sure the education is there to support it.
Thank you. Mr. Roth, my next question for you. What type of technologies are prioritized or most commonly used in this kind of lab?
Well, it really depends on the lab setup and when the lab was set up. The labs were created in different eras and different times, and are as a result using different technologies. I would expect the labs of today are predominantly using deep learning methodologies, having evolved from machine learning some time ago. But the difference being, of course, with deep learning, the AIs are pretty much programming themselves. Going forward with machine learning, you're using data scientists to do much of the groundwork, and the two aren't mutually exclusive in terms of approaches. But these days we're using AIs to write code, and so my expectation is the labs are likely using some large simulation model like NVIDIA's Omniverse, and they're using the current generation of generative AI with the ability to self-program, and that basically reduces the cost of the overall effort. Getting data scientists to work for municipal labs is always going to be tough. They're very expensive. It's a very expensive resource. They want to have some kind of a career path, and the career path in a lab like this is going to be somewhat limited. Where the career path working for a vendor or a supplier or a large company doing deployment is probably going to be stronger. And so here, moving to automated technologies that allow the AIs to do much of the heavy lifting, and then operating in close partnership with the companies that have the resource, and as David pointed out, working with both four-year universities and local colleges, and even in some cases trade schools, in order to flesh this stuff out, is also important, because when you come to the implementation stage, you do need feet on the street, feet on the ground to be able to deploy and set up the infrastructure that you're going to use for monitoring and to assure that the AI is performant once it rolls out. So it's labs, but it really depends on the lab. It depends on what it is they're going to do. The source of the technology should always follow the problem that's to be solved. And so if the lab is predominantly focused on networking issues, then the skill set in AIs are going to be surrounding that kind of technology. If it's looking at a human behavior modification, then that's going to cause it to select a different set of tools. And of course, they're fairly mature tools dealing with traffic management and utility management now out there, and so they can pick from a menu of items that can be modified, and without a lot of heavy lifting, recoded for the particular municipality. So it just really depends on the goal of the lab, where its initial focus is, and of course what the core knowledge of those directing the research is. It does make a lot of sense for lab directors to be deploying or to be working with technologies they know little about, because it's going to be very expensive. So it might be if they're much more conversant with older platforms, then perhaps that's where they're going to focus because they know that better. They're not working while learning, and then as they ramp up to the newer technologies, they'll move to those as appropriate. So it really just kind of depends. It depends on the nature of the lab, the advancement of its personnel, and the overall goals that it's got will inform on the technologies that found its research.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, my next question for you, how does the Urban AI Lab measure different kind of impact of its AI solution for urban sustainability or quality of life? What's your thought?
Well, first, I'd like to say, hey, Dave, did you hear that? Feet on the streets. That's I'm going to have to. I've been retired 10 years now, and that's the first time I've heard feet on the street. I'm ready to civilianize my boots on the ground, the analogy I've used for the 30 years prior to that. I think this idea of forgive me. Could you flash the question up there one more time? I want to make sure I'm getting to the point of this question, which is sustainability and quality of life, and how do they measure the impact of solutions? All right. So again, this goes back to the sensors, and I think as was pointed out earlier, I mean, academia is important, and that goes from the pinnacles of academia to trade schools. We want plumbers putting in fittings that monitor water flow, et cetera. And those are becoming more and more standard in the AC unit I just got from my mom a month ago. So replaced hers with. So it has lots of measurement devices. How do we measure whether or not we're getting what we want? And I think that's a whole different question. In the U.S., for 130 days, we had an organization called DOGE, which was Department of Efficiency in government. But efficiency is not a goal in and of itself. It is always in support of some other goal. So are we creating walkable cities? We can do that efficiently, or we can create automobile exclusive cities. We can do that efficiently. But it's hard to optimize for both. And so I think as we start to measure quality of life, a much more subjective measurement than how much electricity was used in the city versus the number of people in the city. I think we will need to rely on more of a social science approach rather than a direct digital accessing and understanding of the urban environment. It goes well beyond just studying the environment. We can figure out how to make roads handle higher speeds of traffic if that's really what we want. I saw a community that put curves in a road intentionally, and it looked kind of funny because the housing developments hadn't been built around this particular road. But it was a large road. They wanted lots of people to be able to go home, but they wanted them to drive slowly because of because it was a neighborhood. That was the plan, was to call for a neighborhood. So they intentionally built a curvy road that was longer because people would slow down as they drove it. So I studied social science at the University, Texas Christian University back a while back. So those types of tools, measurement by survey, measurement by vote, measurement by city council participation, those types of metrics are out there and can be identified and determined, but it's a little bit tougher than looking at how many packets of information were sent across a network on a given day. That gives you an easy answer. Oh, whatever it was, a bunch, or not very many. So all that being said, I think I'm going to punt because I don't know exactly all the ways to assess that. I mean, the king of Mali, I think, came up with a plan to how do you assess, instead of a national domestic product, right? He talks about this happiness quotient and has a lot of It's a different set of questions. And so I think it requires a different set of questions. And frankly, I think it's a set of questions that AI is uniquely blind to. So it's going to have, because it doesn't experience things. So an experiential account is going to, that's what you're measuring, is what does a human experience here? And that's really not something the AI can tell you. It can go out and gather a lot of people's views about their experience and give you an amalgamized, generalized view of, hey, people are generally happy or sad. But I think that's weak sauce when it comes to doing the research. So it's going to be, I think, in conjunction with local universities, wherever they are, and cities, to get information they can use, and then assessments that they're able to actually feel confident about with small margin of error in the social science world.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. David Smith, how you want to give this answer and rescue us from?
Well, I think the answers so far are very good, but I think I want to take what Alan said, but take it further. Most of the AI tools today were developed using LLMs, large language models. And the more recent trend is to begin to see what is SLM, small learning modules, to begin to get more of the local knowledge in there. And what I'm seeing, particularly with what we're doing with governments, what we're doing with businesses, what we're doing with military, we're taking even the small LMs and we're taking a step down to customize to event-driven learning modules. And it's going to take all of those, because if I try to, and this is one of the challenges we're going to have as we look at urban AI labs, is that we cannot take what is done in China, what is done in Singapore, what's done in India, what's done in Paris, and equate that to what's going to be done in Dallas, Texas, or Austin, or Sao Paulo, Brazil. So the large learning modules have a place, but then you begin to have to build that type of model there. And one of the things, the big answer to this question, Dr. Sharif, is it has to be done with a data-driven monitoring sensing infrastructure. And because you want to continuously capture the information on the community you're in, your mobility, your environment, your infrastructure health, energy, air quality, traffic flows, all those things, water in there. And the challenge we have on that one, Dr. Sharif, is, I've been giving talks the last several years on the age of data. And what we see as of today, we're expected to produce 181 zettabytes of data today. We are currently creating approximately 402 million terabytes of data each day. By 2028, the global data creation is projected to grow to over 390 zettabytes. By 2030, there's going to be over 50 billion connected devices. And this is a statistic, this last one I'm going to put on the table, that scares the heck out of me. By 2030, 10 megabytes of new information will likely be created every second for every human being on the planet. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of data. But that's the data that has to be used to really look at how we use this in place. We have to have a data-driven approach to understand the impact. We have to have a data-driven approach to take action. And so that's part of what you're going to see there, Dr. Sharif, is part of the answer to them. You're going to have to, on the impact, you're going to have stakeholder engagement and different ways to capture both quantitative and qualitative feedback on the quality of life and the solutions. You're going to have to really understand, and this is going to be the hard one, that AI solutions really are not static. They're subject to ongoing adaptation, iterative design. They're being continuously evaluated. And this type of lab should ensure that this happens, but also has to require active human oversight because it's not a static environment. So it's not something that you can make, deploy, and just have it set there because it's learning all the time. It's beginning to look at ways to do that, and you begin to see, what's the sensor base, what's the shareholders, what's the communications, how is it aligned? And the data, is it open data? Is it public data sets? Is it open source software? Is it reproducible? And those are all things, Dr. Shreve, that I believe that you have to have in place to understand the impact. And the data is the key there.
Could I address one point on that? I think David really brought that to a head. And I just want to it just reminded me of an excellent book I recommend, which is Where Do Good Ideas Come From? And the last chapter, he's got about 7 things that happen that create creative spaces. One of the things he identifies in the last chapter, or that he kind of lays out in the last chapter, is these different systems of sharing information, sharing wisdom. And one is sort of this closed model. We make it for our company and it's our company proprietary, or one is a sort of open model. The government makes it and it's available to everybody, or it's an open source code, but there are certain, in this little 4-box matrix that creates, he's identified areas that are good for like the moonshot idea versus areas that are good for making use of research that's already been done. So there's, basic research and goal-oriented research, and then there's research out there that can be used to affect whatever, that engineers can go and work with, or including people in the human engineering design. And I think that is really going to identify how that urban lab works and what they focus on. And as Rob was alluding to, either these things are going to be tailored and customized for purpose. So there's a difference between a proprietary business, small learning module, and the cities, right? Because they're going to be governed and funded differently. And it may be important to identify for what purpose you want to build your lab. And then that, again, goes back to affect how do you monitor the results, right? If it's just a traffic lab or just city function lab, just sensors. But if you're really talking about are people getting the water that's in the pipes, you've got to go talk to people. And that's a whole different source. But that level of sharing, whether it's private or public, or whether it's individual or collective, that's going to determine the quality of the ideas that come out of the project. Not in a good or bad way, but as for what purpose they're employed. Company profit, personal aggrandizement, civic relief, etc. Anyway, I recommend it. Stevens is the author's last name, and it's Where Do Good Ideas Come From? And it is a great fundamental resource for a conversation like this, and many of the ones that we have here. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, what's your closing remarks for today?
Well, the critical part about setting up a lab like this is making sure that its leadership is properly staffed. assuring that at the very least the leadership has a background in government and has a deep enough experience on AI to be able to hire or hire people or select vendors that can be performant. If you lack either the government or the technology skill and leadership, then the lab's probably going to underperform because it's just whatever area is lacking is going to be the area where the vision is going to be lacking as well, and so the direction of the lab over time is probably going to languish. Now you can set up a governance council where you have the leader who in that particular case needs to be very well connected with government. And then the people that are on the council are the ones that are technical experts. But the difficulty is often the experts and that leader don't really understand each other. And so you'll get a lot of friction. And of course, the person making the decision is the one that's not technically competent and may over pivot towards government compliance. And the end result will be suboptimal. But it's another way to fix the problem if you can't find somebody that has the experience in government and the technology. You do not want leadership that is just well versed in the technology, because dealing with government has its own unique set of skills. And if you don't understand them, you're at the very least, you're going to get frustrated, burn out, and leave. And at the most, you're going to make a lot of very bad decisions with regard to surviving the role. So you want the person at the job to be able to sustain the job and not get fired prematurely as well. And so that's why the more important skill set for a lab like this is actually the skill set in government, with the secondary skill set being the one in the technology. But having both is going to result in a far better outcome than having one or the other. So that's it. Start off with the proper build and staffing of the core group, and you should do fairly well. The other thing is certainly make sure that the funding for the lab is fairly solid and can survive changes in administrations. Because setting up a lab and then having a term of the lab being 4 years or less, because the next administration doesn't believe in it, you're just not going to be able to accomplish much. And then the final thing is make sure the lab is providing regular reports out as to what they've accomplished and specifically with regard to how much they've improved whatever it is they've touched. That will allow them to continue to be funded, because often with regard to these efforts, they may do a lot of great work, but if they don't market out what it is they've accomplished, then it's likely that their budget's going to get cut in subsequent years because nobody cares. So if you're not actively telling folks what you're doing and assuming that you're doing things that are having a positive impact, then your ability to sustain the lab is going to be very limited. So that's it for me. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Mr. David, what's your closing remarks for today's session?
Well, Dr. Shreve, thank you again for letting me be part of this. I would like to say one thing that kind of ties some of the thoughts together. I had the honor of leading the first industry-wide technology roadmap in the United States, and I learned a lot with that. But one of the roadmap types that really got me is, and we use this a lot with the intelligence communities here, is something called a future capabilities roadmap. Because what you really want to do is understand in an urban environment like this, what are the future capabilities that are going to be necessary to use within the ecosystem of the city, in the urban environment. And so it's not just responding to the things that AI is really good about in trying to look at real-time operations, but you have to have a future-facing part to it. And I believe that is very important as you look at this. So, if I look at the premise of the Urban AI Lab, it's really part of a global movement to harness artificial intelligence for the betterment of not only the cities but the people who call them home. And the lab should not only advance the science of urban AI, but also has to set new standards for being responsible, for being able to understand the biases that are innately in AI tools. and it has to be reactive and learning, because we see that cities are facing unprecedented challenges in speed now and reaction, particularly with rapid urbanization, evolving to how do you meet the social needs of that? How do they plan, manage, and work through that? And really, the Urban AI Lab work has to be very thoughtful in keeping the needs of all the different parts of the Technopolis really center in what they're doing. So it's really a journey that is beginning. It's towards being more smarter. How do we require the ongoing innovation, the collaboration that is necessary to make this happen? And how do we bring all the stakeholders of the urban environment to be there? Education, again, is one of the keys. Data is one of the keys. And the ability to put together a platform that ensures a smart, intelligent interoperability is going to be one of these keys, because we've talked today mostly about an urban AI lab in a single location. The power of an urban AI lab comes from when you begin to globally begin to network these urban AI labs. That's when you can begin to serve and solve the larger fundamental problems that are shaping how our cities and communities of the future are going to function, and how they will transform. So, Dr. Sharif, thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. What's your closing remarks for today?
Well, I think I threw my 2 cents in about Stephen Johnson's book. I think I got his name wrong and said his last name was Stevenson. Stephen Johnson. But Dr. Sharif, thank you for having me on here. This is a fascinating forum that you have, and I appreciate being a part of it. And we're close to the hour, so I'll turn it back to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a really great discussion, and especially for our university, academia, and different institutions. Uh, I think they can learn a lot from today's sessions. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academia. And hopefully we can develop our own AI lab, and we can uh, do more collaborations around the world. Thank you, Mr. Rob. Thank you, Mr. Allen. And thank you, Mr. David Smith, for your continuous support for World Talent Economic Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.